What if everything you believed about the world was designed to keep you in line? I'm not talking about some wild conspiracy theory. I mean the subtle, everyday messages. The ones you've heard since you were a kid about what's right and wrong, what success looks like, what kind of life you should chase. What if all of it was carefully put in place to shape how you think, feel, and live? Think about your daily struggles, stress, anxiety, that feeling like you're always behind or not quite enough. What if those feelings aren't a flaw in you, but a clue that something deeper is going on, something built into the very system you're living in? Imagine waking up one day and realizing the life you've been building was never really yours to begin with. The goals, the routines, the expectations, maybe they were planted, crafted to keep you chasing, producing, consuming, but never quite arriving. Now, that uncomfortable feeling, that restlessness or confusion you've been carrying, it's not dysfunction, it's awareness. It's the first crack in the illusion. In this video, we're going deeper than surface-level motivation or mainstream advice. We're going to peel back the layers of this system, from culture to media to psychology, and expose how it quietly shapes you, limits you, and trains you to live a life that serves it, not you. And by the end, we'll touch on something they never want you to find: the truth that changes everything. But first, let's rewind and ask, how did we even get here? Look around. Society today is built on distraction. We're drowning in information, but starving for clarity. We scroll through perfectly edited feeds, comparing our messy, real lives to everyone else's highlight reels. We're hit with ads every few seconds, all of them carefully crafted, not to help us, but to make us feel like we're missing something. They want us to feel just a little bit off, a little behind, not quite good enough. And it works. Philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls this the burnout society. In this world, we've become both the prisoner and the prison guard. We push ourselves harder and harder, not because someone's cracking a whip, but because we've internalized the pressure. We feel guilty when we rest. We equate being busy with being valuable. We've replaced presence with productivity, silence with noise, reflection with reaction. And the system loves that. It rewards speed, appearance, efficiency, but rarely encourages depth, authenticity, or self-awareness. Why? Because a society built on consumption and control can't thrive if people slow down and start asking real questions. So, let's do just that.
It rewards speed, appearance, efficiency, but rarely encourages depth, authenticity, or self-awareness. Why? Because a society built on consumption and control can't thrive if people slow down and start asking real questions. So let's do just that. There's a concept from the French philosopher Michel Foucault called biopower. It's the idea that modern societies don't need brute force to control people. Instead, they shape us through culture, through systems, through the expectations we absorb. We're not just forced to conform, we're taught to want to conform. And when we start to believe that our worth is measured by things like test scores, job titles, follower counts, or income, that's when the real control sets in. Think back to school. It wasn't just about learning facts. It was about being ranked, labeled, and taught to obey. The ones who questioned too much were difficult. The ones who followed the rules were gifted. John Taylor Gatto, a teacher and educational critic, once said that the real purpose of modern schooling wasn't to educate. It was to create citizens who fit into the industrial machine. And it doesn't stop after graduation. Social media has turned life into a stage. We post, we watch, we compare. But here's the twist. While you're performing, you're also the audience, constantly judging, measuring, reacting. This creates a cycle of invisible pressure, a constant need to look right, act right, be right. The psychoanalyst Erich Fromm warned about this in his book, The Sane Society. He said that eventually, people would become so afraid of true freedom, they'd choose security through conformity instead. And that's not a sci-fi plot. That's right now. But this isn't about fear. It's about clarity, about seeing the system clearly for what it is. Because the cost of living in this way isn't just burnout or fatigue, it's something deeper. We lose connection to others and to ourselves. Depression and anxiety are rising, not just because of brain chemistry, but because we've lost touch with meaning. We've replaced purpose with performance. We've forgotten who we really are underneath the noise.
Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, said something profound. Humans can endure almost any suffering if they believe it has meaning. But what happens when society no longer gives us paths to meaning, only paths to consumption and comparison? Ask yourself, when's the last time you made a big life decision based on what you truly felt instead of what was expected? How often do you silence your inner voice to stay in line with what's normal, popular, or safe? It's a hard truth, but here it is. A lot of what we call normal today is deeply dysfunctional, but it's everywhere, so we don't notice it. We breathe it in like air. So what's the way out? The first step is awareness, to start questioning the stories you've been told, the rules of success, the definition of happiness, the standards of beauty, the expectations of what a good life looks like. Because when you do that, when you start peeling back those layers, you begin to remember something powerful. You begin to reclaim your own mind. Krishnamurti once said, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." And that's the paradox we live in. The world tells you to fit in, but your soul wants to break free. And that's where awakening begins, not in perfection, but in discomfort, in realizing that what once felt right now feels empty, that the ladder you've been climbing might be leaning against the wrong wall. But that discomfort, that ache, that's not failure. That's a signal, a sign that your mind is starting to wake up. Let's keep going.
So now that the cracks are showing, now that you're starting to see the patterns, the next step is to look even deeper. Because if your reality has been shaped, then by what exactly? And who benefits from it? Let's talk about control. Not just the kind that tells you what to do, but the kind that tells you what to believe. The kind that doesn't use force, but persuasion, suggestion, repetition, until it feels like your own voice. This is where things get real. Because what we're dealing with here isn't just about distraction or busyness. It's about the architecture of influence, how institutions, algorithms, and unspoken rules subtly mold how you think about yourself, about others, and about life. Let's start with belief systems. Every culture runs on stories, and these stories define everything: what success looks like, what love is supposed to feel like, what makes a person valuable. But the question we rarely ask is, who writes these stories? Because they don't just come out of nowhere. Take the story of meritocracy, the idea that anyone can rise to the top if they work hard enough. It's inspiring, right? And in some cases, it's even true. But as sociologist Michael Sandel warns,
meritocracy can hide a dark side. Because when we believe everything is earned through effort alone, it becomes easy to blame the poor for their poverty and glorify the rich as morally superior. It creates what he calls a kind of hidden arrogance. And this doesn't just affect how we treat others, it affects how we treat ourselves. When you believe the system is fair, then any failure must be your fault. You didn't work hard enough. You didn't want it badly enough. And so you keep pushing, grinding, chasing, without ever stopping to ask if the game itself is rigged. That's how belief becomes a trap. Now, let's zoom in on the modern workplace. On the surface, it's all about productivity, achievement, climbing the ladder. But look a little closer, and what do you really see? Most people today aren't working to live, they're living to work.
The World Health Organization has labeled burnout a global crisis, and not because people are weak or lazy, but because they're stuck in a system that rewards self-sacrifice over self-awareness. We're not just clocking in, we're tying our identities to our jobs. Think about that. When someone asks, "What do you do?" they're really asking, "Who are you?" And that works until your job no longer reflects your passion, until your labor is serving a machine you don't believe in. And then you're left with a crisis of meaning. Philosopher Alain de Botton once said, "There is no such thing as work-life balance. Everything worth fighting for unbalances your life." But what if we've been taught to fight for the wrong things? Let's move to media, because this is where things get really sneaky. Modern media isn't just a mirror reflecting society. It's a magnifier, a filter. It amplifies what the system wants you to focus on and often silences what it doesn't. And the algorithms that run your feed, they're not neutral. They're designed to keep you scrolling, comparing, reacting, because your attention is profitable. You're not the customer, you're the product. The more distracted you are, the less you question. The more entertained you are, the less awake you become. Aldous Huxley warned us about this in Brave New World, that the real threat wouldn't be tyranny through pain, but control through pleasure. A society numbed by comfort, indulgence, and triviality. Ask yourself, how much of what you believe about the world was shaped by viral clips, half-read headlines, or sound bites? How often do you feel informed but still feel disconnected? That's not by accident. That's design. Even our idea of freedom has been co-opted. We're told freedom is about having choices, what to buy, what to wear, which app to use, which identity to perform online. But that's not real freedom. That's consumerism in disguise.
Real freedom is the ability to think clearly, to feel deeply, to live authentically. And that kind of freedom is dangerous to the system because it can't be easily sold, swayed, or controlled. So how do you reclaim it? It starts by becoming aware of what's running your mind, especially the parts you didn't choose. How often are your thoughts driven by fear? Fear of falling behind, fear of judgment, fear of not being enough. Psychologist Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Let that sink in. How many of your goals, your habits, your relationships are driven by programming you didn't even know was there? And that brings us to the most important shift of all. What if waking up isn't about learning something new, but about unlearning everything that was never really you? Unlearning the myths of success, unlearning the fear of not fitting in, unlearning the belief that your worth has to be earned. Unlearning hurts. It feels like losing your grip on everything you've built. But what if that's not the end?
What if it's the beginning? Because when you start unlearning, something beautiful happens. You begin to hear your own voice again. The one that's been buried beneath the noise. The one that whispers, "There's more to you than this." This is the beginning of true sovereignty, not in the political sense, but in the psychological one.
It's the kind of sovereignty that allows you to say, "I see through the illusion. I choose differently. I live consciously." And here's the part nobody tells you. You don't need permission to wake up. You don't need anyone to validate your truth. But you do need courage. Because the system won't fight you with guns. It'll fight you with comfort, with distractions, with ridicule, with everything that says, "Just stay asleep. It's easier that way." But if you've made it this far, you already know better. Something inside you has already shifted.
By now, you're starting to see the pattern. You've seen how systems shape what you believe, how fear and guilt and comparison keep you in line, how distractions are used not just to entertain you, but to keep you from remembering who you are. That's not paranoia. That's pattern recognition. But here's the thing. Recognizing the pattern is just the beginning. Now we go deeper into the part of the system that's not external, but internal. The one that lives in your thoughts, your feelings, your habits, the one that sounds like your own voice. Because the greatest control isn't physical, it's emotional. Let's talk about the doubts you carry, the guilt you feel, the fear that creeps in when you want to make a bold move or speak your truth. What if those emotions aren't flaws, but programs? From the time you were young, you were taught to shrink yourself. Don't cry, don't be too loud, don't ask too many questions, don't make others uncomfortable. Be good, be nice, be acceptable. These weren't just rules, they were seeds. And those seeds grew into invisible boundaries around your confidence, your desires, and your sense of worth. So by the time you reach adulthood, most of the control isn't coming from out there anymore. It's inside you. You start to police yourself, doubt yourself, guilt trip yourself. You stop yourself before anyone else has to. And that's exactly what the system wants. This is what Slavoj Žižek talks about when he explains ideological control. Not control through force, but through desire. Through the things you think you want. Through beliefs you've been taught to accept without question. You start to want the job title, the house, the status symbol, because you've been told they mean you're enough. You start to fear losing what you don't even love, because you've been told it defines your value.
Let's break this down even more. Fear is the master key of societal control. And it doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. If you leave that job, you'll have nothing. If you speak up, they'll judge you. If you slow down, you'll fall behind. These whispers get repeated so often, they start to feel like truth. But they're not truth. They're programming. And here's the twist. Insecurity is profitable. Entire industries are built around making you feel less than. The beauty industry, the tech industry, the self-help industry, all telling you you're not enough until you buy this, upgrade that, follow this path. And while you chase becoming enough, you drift further from your authentic self. The psychoanalyst Rollo May once wrote, "The opposite of courage in our society is not cowardice, it is conformity." Let that sit. We fear standing out more than we fear disappearing. So we shrink, we silence ourselves, we play small. But here's the deeper truth. Your discomfort is not dysfunction.
That quiet ache in your chest when you're alone, that voice that says, there has to be more than this. That urge to pull away from the noise and just breathe, that's not weakness. That's life trying to break through the surface.
Now let's talk about guilt. Society weaponizes guilt. You're made to feel guilty for saying no, for taking a break, for not living up to someone else's idea of success. Guilt keeps you tethered to the herd. But here's the question no one asks. What if that guilt isn't a sign you're doing something wrong, but that you're finally doing something real? Because guilt is easy to manipulate. It makes you question your decisions, your value, your path. And when you're busy doubting yourself, you're easy to control. That's why so many systems, religious, political, even economic, spend so much energy shaping your self-perception. Because if you ever see your true worth, you stop playing their game. This is the hidden war. Not rich versus poor, not left versus right, not men versus women. It's between your authentic self and your manufactured self, between the truth of who you are and the story you were told to play. Let's keep going. Most of your beliefs, you didn't choose them. You inherited them from parents, teachers, culture, media. Rarely do we stop and ask, where did this belief come from? Or, does this belief actually serve me? But every belief shapes your perception, and perception shapes your reality. So ask yourself, do I believe success must come with suffering? Do I believe love has to be hard? Do I believe I need to prove my worth to feel peace? And more importantly, who gave you those beliefs?
Because once the mind believes something deeply enough, it will work tirelessly to prove it true. That's why transformation doesn't start by adding more. It starts by removing what was never really yours. Now, here's the turning point. We live in a society that fears silence, that fills every moment with noise, stimulation, distraction. Because silence is powerful. Stillness is where truth shows up. The philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti said, to understand the immeasurable, the mind must be extraordinarily quiet. When was the last time you were truly still? No scrolling, no reacting, no trying to be someone. Just stillness. Because in that stillness, something ancient wakes up, something real. And yes, it's going to be uncomfortable. You'll face resistance. Old versions of yourself will try to pull you back. Familiar patterns will beg you to return to the safe, the known, the normal. But comfort isn't freedom. To truly awaken, you have to let go of the false self, to grieve the roles you played, to peel away the masks and rediscover who you were before the world told you who to be. And here's the radical truth. You don't need to become anything. You don't need to earn your worth. You were always whole. You were always enough. You were simply trained to forget. Now we've come to the final layer, the truth buried under every other truth, the one they most desperately want to hide. You were never separate. The biggest illusion, the foundation of control, is the idea that you are alone, that you are disconnected, that you have to fight to survive, compete to be seen, earn the right to be loved. But it's a lie. You are not just in the world is in you. We are not separate from nature, from each other, from the universe itself.
Science is starting to catch up. Quantum physics shows that everything is entangled. Neuroscience reveals that we're wired for connection, empathy,
resonance. And deep down, your heart has always known this. Have you ever felt someone's pain as your own? Known something without knowing how? Looked into someone's eyes and felt something ancient stir? That's truth breaking through the programming. You are not a machine. You are not a brand. You are not your job title, your follower count, your curated story. You are awareness itself. And once you remember that, you become dangerous to the system because you can't be manipulated. You don't need their approval. You don't need to play small. You're free. Now imagine this awakening multiplied by millions. A world where people live from wisdom, not fear. Where systems serve life, not profit. Where education awakens, not indoctrinates. Where connection replaces competition. This isn't a fantasy. This is a revolution of consciousness. And it begins with one choice. The choice to remember. To stop living someone else's story. To stop asking for permission. To stop waiting. To turn inward. To listen deeply. To trust your knowing. The world will try to distract you again, but you've already seen the blueprint. And now that you've seen it, you can never unsee it. The only question that remains is, who are you when you're no longer afraid? Because the answer to that is everything the world is waiting for you to become.